Well, the food you eat could be killing you slowly with or without your permission, thanks to both deliberate or inadvertent contamination. That is the warning from health experts. Our hotline documentary next week is focusing on two specific areas of such contamination: use of polluted irrigation sources and wrongful application of pesticides. Here are excerpts of the documentary.
They forced it to ripe, thereby adding something I hear it's garbage that they used to conserve the banana for it to ripe at its premature stage. So that was probably the result of what I took. The poison, the garbage they used to force the banana to ripe at its premature stage caused, or how do you call it, made the fruits poisonous and then endangering the lives of people who, like me, who took that banana. The doctor said if I had delayed a little, maybe I could have died out of it.
Sometimes handlers of food deliberately and criminally contaminate them with poisonous chemicals to induce or delay ripening. Some other times the intention is to preserve the foods and make them more attractive to consumers. Remember the survey by the Food and Drugs Authority last year, which showed more than 90% of palm oil on the market contained deadly Sudan 4 dye? Remember the story that formalin was allegedly being used to preserve Kobe and many more? Well, the FDA says regulating such foods is not easy.
When we talk of the pre-packaged ones, or the products that are not pre-packaged, like powdered pepper, agushi powder, all those things that are sold on the market, vegetables, Kobe, palm oil, they are very troublesome too because they are not pre-packaged. So really regulating them is not so easy.
But there are other forms of contamination that happen inadvertently. Nana Bro Hega Efia of the Horticultural Department at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology conducted a study on the quality of some vegetables being consumed in the Kumasi metropolis, including carrots, cabbage, and green pepper. Vegetables sampled from 4 of 5 different suburbs surveyed contained fecal matter, which Hega notes pose a threat to the health of consumers.
They are from maybe physics, the dropping, that could be from the organic fertilizers used. Some use poultry droppings, and also the irrigation water that is used. Because the water is running from refuse dams and gutters, there could be some human fecal residue in the water, which also causes these coliforms.
Dr. Dune Ameme says this is a major source of food contamination.
Contamination of the food can be from the farm to the point that the food is consumed. So if on the farm you are watering the crops and plants with water that is contaminated with human sewage or animal manure, then that food can be contaminated, especially if it is not washed properly.
The fecal contamination was attributed to the deposit of human waste and garbage around the production sites, which pollutes water used by farmers to irrigate the vegetables, a situation that is all too common at various vegetable growing areas including Kwadaso, Tanoso, and Jinyase. I traveled to Jinyase to go observe the cultural practices that farmers apply in their work here. I am here at a large lettuce farm the size of 2 football parks at Jinyase near Atonsu in Kumasi. I see 2 young men carrying spraying cans, running around helter-skelter to fetch water from a nearby source to come irrigate the vegetable fields. I approached to check the water source. It's a drain, what is popularly called gutter. It's a stagnant water source. It's gray and dark in color. I can see fecal matter, and I can see heaps of rubbish.
Excerpts of our latest Hotline documentary. It's put together by Joseph Opokugakpo. He joins me now in the studio with a summary. What is this documentary about? What exactly do you highlight?
So the idea is to draw attention to, the numerous cases of contamination when it comes to the kind of foods that we consume, except that we focused on two particular areas. The first part is what was captured in the excerpt that we saw, contamination thanks to the use of polluted water sources for irrigation activities, and the concern mainly being that for a lot of some of the foods that are grown thanks to the use of these polluted water sources, you don't exactly put them through heat before you consume. So the lettuce, the pepper, the cabbage, the carrots, usually people get them on foods ordinarily without it going through it, and then they consume. And then there are concerns about the kind of works that goes into getting them washed even before the consumption and everything. And mainly the concern, as one of the food experts that in the food documentary there from would point us to, sometimes the use of these polluted water sources, as you saw, it's a deliberate thing, because the farmers assume, not that they assume, but the thinking is that the polluted water sources provide additional nutrients that help with the growth of the various crops. So the vegetables.
From where are they getting that information?
Well, it worked for them over the years.
Okay.
And scientifically, it appears to make sense. Some of these, usually when it comes to organic sources, or the poultry droppings and all of that. Yes, so scientifically it appears to make sense to a large extent. But that's just the first aspect. The second aspect that you see in the food documentary has to do with pesticide application to food. Of course, we've been made to understand that it's not exactly a bad thing in terms of getting pesticides on foods, and the thinking being that we may not be able to feed ourselves if we don't introduce some amount of chemicals into the production that we do. But the concern has been the wrongful application of some of these pesticides.
Okay.
So, for example, the extension officers advise farmers that when you grow your crops and they are ready for harvest, 2 weeks before harvest, you shouldn't apply chemicals, to deal with any pest or anything like that on the field. You should allow at least a 2-week interval between when you do your last spraying of pesticide and insecticides and when you harvest. A lot of the farmers don't actually respect this. In the food documentary, you would see that some of them were telling us that sometimes they spray with the chemicals and then the following day they harvest. And it results in a situation where the chemicals don't break down, and then the foods are brought onto the market, people consume them, and then it resulted in the numerous incidents of people getting running tummy, food poisoning incidents.
Are you able to do any, in the food documentary, are you able to create any direct linkages between that instance and the time where food is actually contaminated with
Exactly.
pesticides?
So there's the researcher at KNUST, Nana Efiaboro, she did a 2-pronged study. The first bit was what focused on the contaminated water sources and the fecal matter that she found on the food when she went to the market subsequently. The other bit had to do with testing the food that she picked from the markets for pesticide residue. And so she did the analysis in the lab, and she found that a lot of the carrots, the cabbage that she picked from the farm gates and even from the market and did the study on contained pesticide residue at levels that were far higher than the normal dosage, and beyond which the chances are that people who consume them will then begin to feel the negative effect of it in terms of them getting food poisoning.
I see.
And then the doctor did the final connection, pointing us to the symptoms that people show when they get food poisoning, and then the causes of food poisoning.
Are there any tips on how to identify, those of us who are not scientists, are there any possible ways for us to be able to detect if we're making our selection? Is that in the documentary?
So we actually spoke to a food, an agri consultant, Aaron Atefa as well, and he was drumming home the point that consumers should begin to take a lot of interest in the kind of foods that they consume. Sometimes you get to the market and you are looking for the most ripe of the tomatoes. The chances are that the ones which are most ripe are the ones that all sort of chemicals, both approved and unapproved, may have been used to get them to that stage. In fact, a victim of food poisoning as well that we spoke to in the documentary drew attention to how come she consumed banana, and in the end it got her into the hospital. She had to be there for more than a week, recovering, and that was linked to a situation of, and that's the allegation, a chemical used in vehicles, I'm told, called carbide or something, that had been used to get the banana to, get ripe even
Faster.
before the normal ripening duration, which is how come the experts are advising that pay particular attention to where you get your food.
I see. That's very interesting, and it's a bit scary though. But I'm sure the documentary will throw light on that. When is it showing again? On Monday.
It's showing on Monday.
On TV.
Yes, at 6:30 p.m. So it's a two-part thing. The first part focuses heavily on the bit having to do with the contamination through polluted water sources, and then on Tuesday that part focuses on the contamination that happens with pesticide residue to a large extent.
Okay, this is something you want to watch. I mean, it could be, if it's about anything else, it's fair enough, but this is about food. We eat food in the morning, afternoon, and evening, unless, of course, you're fasting. Even if you are, you return to eat. So you really want to watch this documentary. Joseph will stay with me a little while longer because I'm taking a very quick break. When I do, after I've done that, we'll talk to the civil society group Food Sovereignty, who have for a very long time now been kicking against calls calling on government to step in and stop the GMO introduction of GMO crops here into this country. We understand there's been a suspension of that trials ongoing at the CSIR. We'll be engaging them in a conversation about it. Please stay with us.